Is the AI bubble really popping, and what does that mean for cybersecurity and cybersecurity jobs as a whole? Well, welcome to the channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Ryan from Elevate Cyber. I'm a cybersecurity professional with over a decade of experience from Fortune 500 companies, US government, freelancing, and I've always been on the offensive side of security, basically trying to hack into companies, also helping people, train them up, getting them into the field for many years. And by the way, if you watched a recent video, I did make this prediction that this is where things were going to go, where I was like, oh, the one caveat, the one thing to watch out for is that, AI gets more expensive than, even having a human employee. And that's what they're starting to see. If you want to watch that video, maybe I'll put it up in the cards after this one, take a look at it. But that was an early prediction that I made months ago. And yeah, it seems like things are going that way. So yeah, let's talk about it. One of the things that's been really tough, as you guys probably know, is getting a job. I don't even want to say in cybersecurity, because it's like all of tech, if not like almost every job in general right now, a lot of fields. I think the only one that's like booming is like the trades are really booming right now. Like they're having their version of the learn to code movement where like everyone is like trying to get into the trades now. And now I wonder if they're going to experience that overgrowth. If you guys have been watching the news lately of news cycle and YouTube and stuff like that, you've probably seen a lot of very different tone around AI and the bubble popping and all of that stuff. I'm gonna give perhaps a little bit different perspective on this than the average general YouTube video out here, because I'm specifically going to be talking about the cybersecurity aspect of it. Like I said, not only am I a cybersecurity professional, but I'm someone that has been like really in the trenches of looking at some of the cutting edge research that is being done on the cybersecurity side. And I've been getting my hands dirty with this stuff as well within the last like couple months here. And I've pretty much been living and breathing AI cybersecurity for the last couple months. So what that looks like is actually one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm running a training for my students on applying agentic AI and LLMs to pen testing right now, because there's a lot of really interesting developments in that space. A lot of it is on the static code assessment side. So basically, if you have source code access, you can, plug up a LLM alongside your static code analyzers, and it can help you kind of triage the findings and prioritize the real vulnerabilities. There's a number of ways where AI has really impacted things. And, I'd like to get into more of that on this channel. I want to make some more technical content again as well. And let me just give you one that I thought was really interesting. If you've been paying attention to cybersecurity news, you've probably been seeing a lot of crazy exploit chains, especially on the web security side. And I think that's going to be one of the long-standing effects of the new AI era. Because while I do believe we are in a bubble, and I'll get into why here in a minute, I do also acknowledge that the tools and stuff are here to stay. Like the technology is here to stay, and it is going to really change the way our day-to-day looks. I would definitely say that much. One evidence of this is the fact that now, if you've noticed, like if you follow the vulnerabilities that are being discovered on the day-to-day, you'll notice that there's been this surge of like really complex exploit chains that we've been seeing, like chaining these primitives together in ways that are like really complex that we wouldn't typically see before the age of AI. Because before, at times it was hard enough just to get a working exploit, and then you publish it, and maybe you get a bug bounty, or maybe you sell it somewhere. Technically there's more that could be done, but the amount of time that it would take would be pretty astronomical. That's one of the really interesting things. I think that's kind of exciting for the space. We'll see some really cool and complex exploits that will be really interesting to read about. I like to read about, like, I wouldn't say novel, because a lot of these are vulnerabilities we've seen forever, but creative ways that some people are putting this stuff together. But now let's get into the bubble part. I don't want to rehash all the talking points that all the other YouTubers are making right now. You can go and watch those videos. But just to kind of summarize a lot of the talking points of like why it's very likely we're in a bubble. You probably know that these companies are not profitable. These frontier AI models, companies that are over them like OpenAI and Anthropic, the big leaders in the space, I think like OpenAI, or the last I heard, they're on pace to be $14 billion. Yeah, billion with a B short by the end of the year. And yeah, they tried to put ads in it and it wasn't really working or something like that. We were thinking about it and it just Yeah, a lot of the big companies are starting to lose faith in them, kind of band together and do their own thing. We've seen that with, if you saw the breach that recently happened where OpenAI, one of their models hacked Hugging Face. I made a video on that. Well, one of the aftermath effects of that was that a bunch of these companies, big companies, have banded together to start developing, okay, how can we use our own models that we're running in our own, that we have access to, so we don't have to just give everything over to OpenAI and Anthropic, and then we're also not beholden to their guardrails. So when this happens again and there's an incident, we need to be able to use AI to help assist in the incident response. We're able to do that without having to worry about those guardrails. And then also there's all the security IP concerns, right? It's like you're giving your data away to a third party, and under contract, they're like, oh, promise guys, we won't do anything with your data. But they don't know that, right? These companies already have massive data centers. They have the hardware. They could totally run a lot of this stuff. Maybe not at the replace all human workers level like they were hoping for, which I'll get into that in just a second. But yeah, that's the next part, right? I mean, I guess let's talk about that, right? They've been saying like, oh, we're going to replace all workers with AI. People were making outlandish claims. I remember a couple of years ago, someone told me that in 5 years, all jobs will be gone. Like people are making like these audacious claims, right? And, I think one of the most interesting arguments, I was watching a video by this guy that was engineer. He worked for like some of the power grid stuff in the US. I think he was like electrical engineer or nuclear engineer or something. And he was going through the mathematics of just how it's mathematically impossible, just if you factor in the heat requirement, the amount of heat these, the compute would produce if they did actually reach their idealistic state of being able to replace all workers. And it was just so far-fetched. Like the more he got into the numbers, the more outlandish it seemed. And he's like, oh yeah, that's assuming that, everything else is, as they say, as ideal as they say. Like, he was saying, and even in the most ideal scenario, there was just no way. It was just so outlandish that it could ever happen just from like a power energy standpoint. So yeah, there's like, when you really break this down, it's, the cracks start to show, I guess we'd say. Like I said, a lot of these companies are starting to lose faith now. It's just a matter of which is the first hyperscaler. And by hyperscaler, I mean these massive companies like Google and, Meta and all them, to say we're not going to put our CapEx, keep upping our CapEx into the AI technology. Who's the first one that says, okay, we're going to conserve budget a little bit. That's when, it's really going to get interesting. We'll see what happens, because a lot of times one of these hyperscalers makes a decision and the rest follows suit. And another thing in the bubble that is a huge indicator is the circular financing thing, where basically the big companies are, trading money back and forth amongst each other, like as part of the cycle, right? Because NVIDIA makes the chips, and then they build the data centers, and then the OpenAI and Anthropic, use the data centers for their stuff. And then like they're basically funneling money back and forth, all these like hyperscaler companies and OpenAI, Anthropic, all that. And so that's artificially propping up the economy. And that's the reason why it seems like, why are they saying, oh, it's record-breaking stock market, and like, oh, this company broke this record and that record, and Dell's stock is like through the roof, compared to when I was in there, right? Why is that? But then at the same time, on the day-to-day, you and everyone is like feeling really squeezed, like it's really difficult, like everyday life is like really hard, and like the economy seems like it's not good, but they're telling you like the complete opposite. But you also, you might have heard like there's been some funny cases like from some of these companies, like Uber actually ran through their entire annual budget for tokens in the first 4 months of the year. And that gets me into the next point, which is the whole token maxing thing, which is absolutely like diabolically stupid and pretty hilarious. So, if you guys don't know what token maxing is, I bet almost everyone watching this knows, but in case you don't, they were basically saying like, they were rating their employees. A lot of these companies, big companies, were rating their employees by how many tokens they burned. So what people ended up doing, especially like the tech people, right? Because the tech people, they're smart, right? They game the system. They would just have scripts running that would just burn tokens for no reason, because people would literally be brought in, had to talk to their manager, and were under performance review because they didn't spend as much, because, Bob, he didn't spend as much tokens as Sally. So Sally was getting praised, and Bob was getting reprimanded because he didn't burn enough tokens on useless stuff that probably wasn't even going to help the business anyways. Now, here's the next problem with AI and the whole token maxing thing is, and I know this as a business owner, some of the things you can automate now that allows you to do things you would never do before. You're able to actually work on things and get things done that you wouldn't even take on as a project before AI because it would be too cumbersome and it wasn't a high enough priority. The problem with that is then you end up building all these things that aren't really important in the first place, right? Because if you couldn't really find the time to do it without AI. Now AI gives you the time to do it. You're going to still have to maintain that script. You're going to have to build it. You're going to have to put energy and thought into it. You could be putting into something else. And you end up just building a lot of stuff in many cases that wasn't really that important to begin with, which is why you wouldn't have prioritized it and done it before AI existed anyways. I think with companies, you're seeing that at scale, essentially. When you talk about companies with like thousands of employees, now they're all spending these tokens, which they're paying the API costs too. Let me just point that out, right? They have to, like when we're talking tokens, a lot of times these big companies, they're not on subscriptions. Like if they're going to use it in scripts and in their like production code, they got to use the actual API keys from OpenAI and Anthropic and stuff. And that can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. Like that's how Uber burned through their budget in 4 months. And they're not the only company to spend like a ton on their budget. Now you've heard of these big companies pulling back and telling their employees not to spend so much on the tokens. I think that was one of the early signs that we might be in a bubble here. And then China, I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. You can make an entire video on that. But they're coming out with all those open weighted models, the open source ones. And, like I mentioned in the Hugging Face breach, the forensics people end up having to use a Chinese model, GLM 5.2, just to get the AI working because the Anthropic and OpenAI ones were blocking them due to guardrails. So yeah, it's a really interesting time for sure. I like to cover more ways that I'm using AI in cybersecurity on this channel. I think like absolutely this, like I said, the technology is here to stay. So absolutely, if you guys want to make sure you have that job security and make sure that, you're able to advance in your career, you absolutely have to be learning AI security. And I know I'm saying absolutely a lot, but I really want to drive it home. It's so important. And I think now is like the best time to really dive into that stuff. Like right now, like I said, I'm running a training on this stuff, and it's not a pitch for the training or anything like that. The enrollment's closed. We're actually finishing the last webinar tomorrow. But one of the things that I'm really diving into a lot in my own learning and that I'm featured in part of the course is using things like agentic AI to assist me in my pen testing. Like even reverse engineering, it's incredibly good at reverse engineering because, computers understand how computers basically work, right? So if you have a bunch of hexadecimal and ones and zeros and stuff that's not pretty and easy for us to understand, the AI has no problem. It can read it like it's, human readable language pretty much. And so it can really speed up certain things like that. I even did a webinar on how to rapidly weaponize end-day vulnerabilities using agentic AI. And that's one of the things that's really insane too. Here's a little exercise you guys can try out for your own if you're kind of practicing with this stuff. Is it literally, back in the day, right? If there was a vulnerability, because keep in mind, many vulnerabilities don't have any corresponding exploit. There's no major exploit. I would like to do a video. Let me know in the comments section if you'd be interested in seeing something like this. But yeah, many vulnerabilities don't have a public exploit out there. If you do a lot of CTFs, you might think like, oh, every vulnerability has a POC because I'm using it on all my CTFs. But that's why the CTF exists, right? Because there's a POC for it. You don't have to like custom write the exploit. But in reality, a lot of them don't have those POCs. And so the skill set to weaponize some of them, depending on the vulnerability, of course, could be quite difficult. And traditionally, it required a very specialized skill set. You had to know what you're doing, and it's going to take quite a bit of time, and you got to be able to reverse engineer from the patch notes and stuff like that. And, if it's open source, even still, you got to read through a lot of code and spend a lot of time to really understand that well and identify where it is. Some of the patch notes can be quite vague on purpose, and that would take a lot of time to get a working exploit. Now, I showed my students, I literally took an exploit that I just found like that day, and I didn't know anything about the web app that it was against. I knew nothing about like the platform it was against. I knew nothing about the exploit. All I knew it was like an unauthenticated remote code execution vulnerability. That's literally all I knew. I literally just took the agentic AI, I gave it access to the source code because it was an open source project, and I gave it access to the NVD security advisory, which was very vague, by the way. It was very vague. And I said, basically told it to go find this vulnerability and write an exploit for it. And I gave it like the live application running in a Docker container so that it could test out the POC that it wrote against that to verify that it worked. It took about like 7 minutes and it had a working POC, and I ran it against the live application, and I got a reverse shell as the root user. And so, yeah, that goes to show like any script kiddie can do this, and that's crazy. We're in different times right now, but definitely you want to be upskilling yourself with this. If you're not integrating AI into what you're doing, you're really missing out. You could overdo it as a learner where you're too reliant on it, but you're absolutely going to need to be fluent in this stuff. So get started now. And if you want to see more videos on AI and some technical stuff, not just the generic stuff that you can typically find out there on YouTube, let me know and I'll start making some more technical videos on this stuff, because I think this stuff is super cool and pretty interesting. And yeah, I think regardless of the AI bubble and all that, it's going to be really cool to kind of use this to accelerate what you're doing on the side. So yeah, to basically sum it up, I would say that the jobs are going to come back, I think, in cybersecurity. And actually, they're already silent hiring. That's another thing about the whole bubble thing, right? These companies are silently hiring back a lot of the people that they fired, apparently. But they're trying to do it very discreetly because that doesn't look good towards investors. But, the investors are probably aware of this. If, you and me are aware of this, they probably are too. But yeah, they're trying to do that covertly and hire back a lot of the people they fired. So yeah, I think, give it some time. It might not be tomorrow, it might not be next month, but I think like the jobs are going to open up again. But I do still think like the barrier to entry is going to be higher and lower at the same time. Now, what do I mean by that? I think that the barrier to entry is going to be higher in the sense that it's going to be harder as an entry-level skilled person to land a job, but it's also going to be lower because you have AI to help you as a learning assistant. So it's all in how you use it, right? Like even YouTube. There's people that go on YouTube and just watch like, slop videos and like random, cat videos and stuff like that. And they don't really get that much learning value out of YouTube. And then there's people like you guys, probably, honestly, if you're watching like a cybersecurity video on your YouTube feed when you could have just been watching like, I don't know, Mr. Beast or something, there's people that use it as an amazing learning and research tool. So I think AI is going to be similar too, right? You can use it in a way that's not very helpful, or you can use it in a way that is going to be like really instrumental in kind of accelerating your learning. I just did a CTF the other day on a ARM. It was like a hardware hacking, like ARM architecture microcontroller. And I've never touched hardware hacking, let alone a ARM microchip in my life. So I didn't really know what the heck I was doing, but I was able to use AI to assist me and kind of walk me through. And I was basically telling it to like, walk me through your methodology. Like, what would you try and why? And it was like, it gave me really good stuff. And I ended up completing that challenge that I was working on. And I used that to build out a methodology that I then kind of refined over time over the course of doing a few of these challenges. But that's just one such example of, what you can do with this stuff.